sure I've got. Hey, everybody. Give me one quick second, and then I will do intros. All right, there we go. All right, looks like we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 out of 9. I know there's at least 2 people that can't be here. The other one, hopefully, we will see them. So, everybody, I'd like to introduce you to a good, close, personal friend who is a wonderful human being and an amazing trainer / business owner / guru of all things fitness, exercise, diet, who is kind enough to talk to us today about exercise and its role in both health, the mental and physical part of it. So I know she is going to be talking about injury prevention, and I'll let her talk about or get into what she's going to cover. Now, I know normally we cover this and then have our guests in, but we wanted to make sure Sarah was able to get to us today. So we are doing this a little bit backwards, but I think it's still fine. So we will be talking about exercise, nutrition, and injury prevention on Wednesday, but we have the benefit of having an Uber expert with us here today. And by the way, Sarah is the owner of Tonicity Fit in gym in Westchester, which is an amazing place if anybody wants to go there or eventually work there. I know, Sarah, you may want to kind of find out what people's majors are too. I know that we definitely have some exercise and fitness people here as well. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let Sarah speak. And Sarah, you're able to share your screen whenever you want. So I will shut up.
Okay. Awesome. So I am Sarah Ostrowski, and I thank you all for adjusting your schedules for me today. I have thankfully, despite the pandemic, had a really, really busy schedule the last couple of months, which I'm very grateful for. So thank you for adjusting a little bit for those of you who swung your schedule and are coming in during a non-class time. I am the owner of Tonicity Fit, as Jeff had said, and I have been an exercise physiologist for just about 21 years now. I look young. Everybody's always like, you're a baby, but I'm actually 39 years old, and I have been, like literally pretty much right out of high school, I started training. And since then, 21 years of experience, and I have a master's degree and a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in integrative exercise physiology. So, and lots of experience with all different kinds of populations, whether it be special populations, athletic populations, younger people, middle-aged, older. I tend to specialize in pre through postmenopausal women. However, over the course of my life, that really has fluctuated. It really depends on where I'm at. I will also say that my gym it's interesting. It started off with primarily females working out here, probably because that's what I've generally tended to attract. But then their husbands started working out here. And now I have this really lovely blend of all different kinds of, it's very family oriented gym. So I have all different kinds of populations. And I love that. That is definitely my wheelhouse and something I totally appreciate. My tried and true passion in this industry is aging. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And this is the first time. So this is the 3rd year I've spoken for you, Jeff. Can you believe that? But I decided this year to go down a slightly different path than I normally do and kind of try to tie in that injury control and injury prevention into aging and what happens when we age, and why it is so very important for us to start thinking about those things now so that we can preemptively prevent injuries in the future. Does that make sense?
So if I had taken this class 20 years ago, I wouldn't be hobbling around now the way I am, is basically what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. There you go. You should stop. You're not hobbling around that bad. There are people that are worse. So the first thing that I would like to know, as Jeff had said, is what your majors are. So I think I can see, how many people did you say we have in here, Jeff? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are there 6 people here right now?
Yep.
6. Okay. So I see McLean. Is that right? Am I saying it right? What is your major?
I'm an exercise science major.
Oh, perfect. Okay. And what year are you in right now?
I'm a sophomore.
Okay, awesome. And what about you, Sean?
I'm a nursing major and I'm in my junior year.
Oh, okay, great. Well, this will be super relevant to you as well, for sure. And Marie?
I'm a theology major and I'm in my junior year.
Okay, awesome. And Kara?
I'm a senior in high school, so I don't have a major yet.
Okay, what are you thinking about?
I'm not really sure.
So is this like an AP course for you?
Sort of.
Okay, good for you. That's awesome. Okay, and Zoe?
I'm an exercise science major.
And what
In my
year are you
sophomore
in?
year.
Sophomore. Okay. Wait, who am I missing here? Let's see. Did I get everybody? Jada?
Hi, I'm an exercise science major too.
Okay. All right. What year are you in?
I'm a junior.
Okay. All right. That's great. Awesome. Did I get everybody? I think I got everybody. Okay. So I think it's going to be relevant to so many of you. I even a theology major, to be completely honest with you, because I don't know what you're planning on doing with theology, but I went to a Christian university for my bachelor's degree and found that it was very relevant to tie in that theological side of things with the health wellness, especially health psych side of things. It really does help, especially when you're talking about people's quality of life, because there's a very holistic and also like religious component that comes with that, with the way that a lot of people live their lives. So I think it will be relevant to every single one of you that's here. So with all of that said, I did prepare a little bit of a slideshow, and it might be a little bit nerdy here and there, but not too bad. And I'll try to make it a little bit interesting and relevant. So start thinking for a second, how many of you have people in your lives, whether it would be your parents, or I'm sure in this university you're all different ages, right? So maybe it's parents, maybe it's aunts and uncles, maybe siblings. You never know. I have a sibling that is like over 25 years older than me. So, or maybe it's grandparents that they are aging well, and then others that are maybe not aging so well, right? And we think about things like fall risk. We think about things like, you hear about elderly people getting hip replacements and knee replacements and osteoporosis, which I know because I'm pretty sure I saw on Jeff's slides, you'll talk about things like that. Now, the important thing for us to know is that all of those regressions in our lives, they start way earlier than you would think. So which one of you is the nursing major? Was that Sean? You're a nursing major, right?
Yes, me.
Okay, so Sean, let me ask you as a nursing major, not to single you out or anything, but do you know at what age, textbook wise or statistically, we start to regress when it comes to the processes of aging?
I don't know the exact age. I would guess it's somewhere around 60s.
Okay, all right, that's good. And then was it McLean that said you're an exercise science major?
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, and what about you? What do you think?
I think it's late 40s, early 50s.
Okay, great. All right, good. Does anybody else have any input on that? Any different ages? Okay, so hold your seat. Probably around 34 or 35 years old. That's when we start to really experience the decline in or regression, when aging really starts to kick in, the processes of aging. And what that means is There's the process of aging, and then there's the way that the process of aging is exacerbated or it happens faster. And the exacerbation of the process of aging happens with environmental factors or habits, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then there's our biological processes of aging, and those things take part no matter what we do. But exercise is something that we can do to prevent that regression from becoming faster, right? Exacerbated or expedited. And it's something that we can do to also prevent lots of injuries in the future. So baseball players, I'll use that as an example. You know how a lot of baseball players will tend to retire in like their early to mid 30s? That's the reason why. Now I say baseball because I'm biased, I'm partial because that's my favorite sport, but there's lots of other sports where they retire early. And the reason for that is because their processes of aging are against them, right? And they start to have more injuries throughout their lives, even though they've got these athletic trainers and so on and so forth, this whole team of athletic directors. And this just like, they go to physical therapy, they do things like ballet, believe it or not, they do yoga, Pilates, everything to try and slow that down. But because they've been so very active, they need to retire a little bit younger and step into other roles such as management of sports or administrative side of sports, or sometimes statistical analyses and things like that, because those processes of aging sneak in around like 34, 35 years old. So with that said, I am going to start my slide here. Hold on. I did start to share and then I went on a tangent. Give me 1 second.
For you, I think it's on the top.
Yeah, I know where it is.
Oh,
I
okay,
see.
sorry.
I'm just looking for my slide. Okay. Can you see my slide right now? Does everybody see that? Yeah? Okay, good. What if I do it like a slideshow? Tell me if you can, hold on, I'm starting the slideshow. Can you still see the slideshow? Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so aging, health, and physical activity. This is injury prevention and control as well. So what is healthy aging, right? It's an extraordinary process where you become the person that you always should have been throughout your life. And this is, and you know, Jeff probably knows who David Bowie is. I don't know if other people know, no offense or anything, but I've been a teacher for a long time, and the longer that I teach, the less people know the people that I listen to. I don't know what it is. So I already asked you this question. So there's two different types of aging. There's primary aging and there's secondary aging, which I had talked to you about before. Primary aging is that biological standpoint where it's inevitable, right? It's age-related. Things start to go down from the time you're about 35, let's say overall about 1% per year. We'll talk a little bit about some of the things that happen. I won't get too nerdy on you, just because I know that it's just a health psych class. So an example of this would be puberty. Puberty is actually a sign of aging. Now, an interesting thing about puberty for young people is when you're prepubescent, like right before you start to go through that, if you start a strength training plan, your first initial gains are neurological gains. They're not just muscular and strength gains. So puberty is the point where it's actually beneficial to you, because then you start to have primary strength gains and so on and so forth. But it is an example of aging. As we age, our processes change. And from the time that you hit puberty, your hormones start to change. And that really starts to have an effect on your body, an effect on your future, which does, as I said, in the long run, tie into injury prevention. And then something like menopause. So that's another example of aging. When women get much older, they go through menopause anywhere between, it can start really at 45, but usually not until like mid 50s and later, when they start to lose the amount of estrogen that they're creating, and they start to need to think about bone health. They actually need to think about this beforehand. And so this is all about prevention. Bone bone health. We need to think about your muscular composition. And you also need to think about your joint health and your joint stability, because menopause has an effect on all of those things. But something like puberty and menopause, no matter how much you exercise, no matter what you do, puberty, you're going to go through it. And menopause, it's going to happen. There are many other examples of primary aging. These are just ones that I opted to give you for today. Secondary aging, like I said before, are the interactions between primary aging with diseases, environmental influences, and your habits as you get older. So if you have any questions at any time, you can stop me and ask, please. I'll try not to go too fast. And like I said, I won't geek out too much. But the problem, or the thing is, that primary and secondary aging, they are very strongly intertwined with each other. Does that make sense? So let's talk about genetics. We have our genes, right? You might hear the term like, it runs in the family, right? Heart disease runs in the family. For me, I actually, I have cancer right now. I have breast cancer. And one of the reasons that I'm going through it is because it's genetic. It runs in the family, right? So that's just another example of it runs in the family. But whether or not something runs in the family, you can still combat a lot of those things with your secondary aging, and that's your habits and the choices that you make throughout time. And this also can tie very strongly into injury prevention when it comes to things like heart disease, and when it comes to things like joint stability or bone health. Some people have more disposition for, so if a lot of people in your family have osteoporosis, or a lot of people in your family have diabetes, that's all affecting your metabolism. So you can't necessarily go through life saying like, my grandparents and my parents and my aunts and my uncle all had diabetes, so I'm getting diabetes. What you can say is, it runs in my family, so I am going to make certain exercise and health and wellness choices with the way that I exercise, the nutrition and the environmental components that I expose myself to combat the possibility of this strong factor that runs in my family. Does that make sense? And maybe that might be a way that we can start to tie into aging, into injury prevention, and also prevention of illness and disease. And all the things you're going to talk about with Jeff, these are all things that are symptoms, or their progression of aging that you have to combat as you exercise and you get older. So, like I said before, I'm asking you now, can the aging process be slowed? So your answer should be at this point, yes, it can be slowed. We can combat our genes, and we can combat how quickly we age with the choices that we make right now, and in the long run, prevent injuries. So before I go further, does anybody have any questions right now? Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because I don't want to go too fast for you. So physical activity throughout our life. If we look at infancy all through the oldest of old age, these are the roles that physical activity can play for us. When we're babies and we're born, mobility is the primary mover of our lives. Even doctors check you out, and the first bits of development and milestones that they look at are, is the baby turning? Is the baby tracking when you move your finger? Is the baby smiling? Those are all part of mobility, all part of our development. Then as a child gets older, you start to look more at personality-based identities, not just looking at their mobility, but mobility is tied to that as well. As adolescents, so, these ages, they vary a little bit, but we look at whether they're developing their identity, maybe they're playing sports, so on and so forth. And then we go through that until we get to about middle-aged, right? So I would argue that this would start between like 30, 35 and above. We're looking at self-esteem and then maintenance, right? So maintenance as far as their daily functions and things like that. When we get even older, we're looking at activities of daily living and then their ability to be independent as they get even older. So the whole point in this is that if we have an earlier priority on our physical health, then these things like our mobility and our activities of daily living, and not just that, but if we're athletic, right? And we're playing sports, our ability to maintain that and not get injured by the sports that we're playing, exercise and good nutrition plays a huge role on us combating these things and controlling them a little bit earlier. Does that make sense? So if you start the exercise process and you start to understand how good strength, good nutrition, good mobility will affect you in the long run, then you can combat these things as you get older. And a lot of people start to see a lot of these injuries earlier than you would think. So, and I'm not just talking about athletes here, I'm just talking about the general public. I see, let's see, shoulder injuries, I see knee injuries and low back injuries that really commonly tend to happen between the ages of like 30 and 45 years old. And a lot of those people, the reason that they're dealing with that is because they're either not exercising properly or they haven't exercised at all soon enough in their lives to make sure that they're fighting off those issues. So, like we talked before, when does this start to happen? The answers that I got anywhere between like 40, 45, all the way up to 70 or 80 years old, that is always what I get. I have never, to this day, had somebody guess between like your early to mid 30s. Never, still to this day. The day that it happens, that person is going to get a free membership to my gym. So shh, don't tell, no, I'm just kidding. So like we talked about 35. Let's talk about bone health now, because Jeff, you are going to have a time when you talk about osteoporosis and things like that, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So this is
that picture looks like my mom.
Yeah, I'm sure, right? And it looks like a lot of our moms, right? And a lot of our grandparents. And this is a big example of injury prevention that we can do early on in our lives. Do you know that statistically, over time, our height starts to decrease? And the reason that our height starts to decrease over time is because we're not doing things like Jeff's favorite form of exercise, yoga and Pilates, right? Yeah, I know he loves it. His wife makes him do it, by the way.
I'm just bad at it. That is.
Yeah, you're very good at it. You're better than you think. Anyway, so they're not doing exercises like that. They're losing the density of their discs in their back. You might hear like bulging discs, things like that. The cushioning part of the disc starts to go away. But a lot of ways that you can prevent that is a lot of lengthening and strengthening exercises that you can do not only to the spine, but I'm just focusing that on that right now to keep that kyphotic phase. So do you see kyphosis is when you get that little hunchback? That can happen to you as well. Probably the two worst populations for that I have ever seen are accountants and teachers. Accountants and teachers sit over top of their desks like this for their entire careers. Lifetime students, doctoral students sit like this for so many years of their lives, and they don't combat that by exercising and stretching and strengthening so that they don't have this happen over time. Now, one thing I want to point out to you that I think is very beneficial is if you look at this curve here, we start to increase our height up to, look at that, about 35 years old, right? And then it starts to decrease our cumulative or our regression in height over time. And here's the other thing that I want to point out. As we get older, and remember we talked about menopause, for women, it's significantly worse because we're losing a significant amount of estrogen around that 55-year-old time, and we're losing our bone density because as we age, When we lose that estrogen, we lose the ability to metabolize, and we lose our porous, our bones become more porous. So we increase until we're about 20. The loss starts around 35 to 40 years old. And then we lose approximately 1 centimeter per decade between 40 and 50 years old. This is, pretend this is a person, okay, this is just like general regular aging, right? This is a regular process of aging that will happen, right? And if we are accountants, teachers, or, you know, I just say that, I use those as examples because they're populations that I see a lot, but actuarial work, all different kinds of things like that. You'll see an even faster decline in that kyphotic curve because they're not stretching the chest and strengthening the back to straighten everything up and keep yourself strong and have good form. Some of you I see are sitting right now against a wall and you're sitting up straight. I'm so proud of you for that. I don't know if others, because I can't see all of you, are like sitting on your bed and you're hovering over me right now, but just take a second and straighten yourself out. Now think about how many times you sit during your classes, especially with our virtual classes, and you're just looking at your screen like this all the time. So some things that you could do right now to combat that is you can regularly open up your chest and stretch it a couple of times a day. Set a timer on your watch or on your phone to stretch in this direction. You could get an exercise band and you could strap it around something and pull it backwards so that you're strengthening your back at the same time as stretching those back muscles. So those are just some small examples for you of things that you can do right now where exercise can help you combat this loss, this 1 centimeter or more loss per year as you age. And like I said, I know you have varying ages because you're in school, but we're all adults here, right? So it's coming. It's coming. So the sooner that you do this and the sooner that you're aware of these changes that your clients can make, whether they are your patients, whether they're your students, or whether they are your clients, if you know about these things and you're aware of it, then you can help them prevent it even sooner. So like I told you before, we're changing the shape of the discs. We have loss of muscle tone, especially if we're not doing a lot of exercise. Some other things that it doesn't say here is you get really tight pectoral muscles. So those are your chest muscles. They get super tight. They cause a rolled shoulder. And then everything starts to lean forward. You have these two muscles that are right here along the front. They start to get really, really tight and then they're crunching you forward. So I'll tell you, one time I was walking, I used to work in Philadelphia in the city, and I was walking to the train to go home one day, and I saw an old lady walking down the street who literally had a kyphotic curve so bad that her head was down like this, and when she came to a side street, she would have to lift her head up to be able to see the light, and then as soon as the light went, her head would go back down and she would walk across the street. I remember being so afraid. I wanted to just hold her hand everywhere, but it's a real thing, and these things really happen to people over time, and that's a very extreme case. So she probably had some other factors, but that was also about 15 to 20 years ago. So her generation also had an effect on that. And that's something you also have to think about because exercise wasn't the priority for her generation. So something, again, that you want to start thinking about now. Another thing is body composition. So there's two different aspects to body composition. We have fat mass and we have fat-free mass. The take-home message for this, I'm not going to get too crazy about it. So I use this slide for some of my students as well. So I won't get into the nitty-gritty bits where it says like lipolysis and things like that. Don't worry about that. But our fat-free mass as we get older generally tends to decrease. We lose muscle composition and we lose muscle cells starts at 35 years old. No matter what we do. There is no way to stop your muscle cells from going in the reverse direction or atrophying over time. But what we can do is we can make sure that we have healthy muscle cells, healthy, full muscle tonus, so that when we start to experience aging, the results are not quite as intense, okay? So think about it this way. Think about a person who you might know in your life that you know has never exercised. You're probably already thinking about their posture because of what we've talked about now. Think about what they look like, their body composition, or their strength abilities, not just their ability to like lift up their nieces, nephews, grandchildren, but also their ability to maybe put a cup away, or different issues that they've had. Taking plates is a good example. Taking plates out of a cabinet, a big group of plates for like Thanksgiving dinner, and putting them down. Over time, they lose the ability to do that if they're not exercising regularly. So something that you can do to avoid injury to those people is exercise them. Get them lifting dumbbells, get them working with the trainer, get them moving. Any questions so far? Okay, great. So with that said, you start to lose your muscular tissue starting at 35 at about, let's just say like anywhere from approximately 10%. It could go all the way up to like 25, 30, 40% per year, depending on your habits. Like smoking. Smoking is a really big one. Smoking inhibits your blood cells' ability to efficiently carry and move oxygen, and oxygen is what we use to fire our muscle tissue off. So if you know anybody who smokes, or you smoke yourself, you can probably multiply all this by at least maybe a third over time. Smoking has a real negative effect. And then
Question, Sarah, when you're talking about smoking, I'm finding a lot more people are vaping than smoking these days. Just as bad, or have you?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Anything?
So there's the jury, I believe, is out on that right now. I got muted first.
Sorry, I meant to mute myself and I muted you instead.
No problem. That's okay. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of ongoing research with that, because they're finding that people who are vaping, they're actually having a lot of cardiovascular and lung issues, and susceptibility to cancer that they didn't realize that they would have had before. Because even though the smoke has a lot of carcinogens in it, they're finding that the actual tobacco itself, the actual nicotine itself, and not just nicotine, but also a lot of the chemical components that are combined with the tobacco. So that's like a really multifaceted issue that is still being studied. I don't think that it necessarily has the same effects on your blood cells' ability to carry oxygen, but I think that it has some noxious or toxic effects on your body because of the chemicals that are combined with the tobacco. So I think that the goal there is trying to find better chemicals, I guess you could say, or better components to combine them with. A lot of the flavoring that is used, because if you think about it, we're still inhaling that into our bodies and into our vessels and our cells. So I can't give you an answer as far as like when it comes to inefficiency of carrying oxygen, or losing muscle tissue, or losing bone density, but I can tell you that they do know that it is having a negative effect on the body. They just don't know exactly why yet. Okay. All right. So it's very interesting research that is going on right now, though. I just think that I know that it is really, really challenging to quit smoking. I used to smoke, and it took me a lot of years to quit, But if you smoke, you might want to think about quitting now so that you can age a little bit more gracefully and feel better as you do that. Okay, so There are also some primary structural changes that take place as we age that with exercise we can combat. So our arteries it's vascular tissue. So we have veins and we have arteries and we have capillaries. So I'm just going to talk about arteries a little bit real fast. An artery is a vessel that sort of has a little bit of smooth muscle tissue around the outside of it. And it's an involuntary process where as we start to, I'll use exercise as an example, as we start to exercise, the first thing that happens is we start to breathe a little bit faster, right? Our heart starts to pump a little faster and our pressure of our blood actually starts to increase. And the reason for that is because, remember I said we need oxygen in order to be able to function. We need oxygen to exercise. And our brain is telling our body, pump faster, pump the blood more efficiently so that we can get oxygen to these exercising parts of the body. Well, naturally, as we get older, our arteries start to sort of get a little bit not so wide, right? A little bit thicker. The diameter decreases. Think about a hose that's connected to your house outside. I know every single one of you, I'm sure, has used a hose at one point in your life. If you take that hose and you kink it, what happens? No water comes out, right? No water comes out because we've decreased the diameter or the circumference of that hose. So what that is going to do is have an effect on pressure and flow that goes through our vessels. So if you take that kinked hose and you think about what if you took a marble and you put it inside of that hose, it's going to have the same effect. As long as you're pushing on it and keeping it in, no water is going to get through. It's the same effect when you start to develop plaque on the inside of those arteries, on the inside of those vessels. We cannot stop that from happening over the course of aging in our lives, but we can prevent it from being as extreme. And the way that we can do that is with exercise. And the reason that we can is called compliance. So I'll explain that to you real quick in layman's terms, sort of. So when you start to do cardiovascular exercise, okay, so this is heart disease prevention here. So this is really important because the #1 cause of death in the world is cardiovascular disease, right? And this starts to happen as we age, and this is how we can prevent it with exercise. As you exercise, we talked about your heart beats faster, you're breathing harder, your pressure goes up because we need oxygen and we need our blood to flow more efficiently. Well, there's this little thing that happens inside of our vessels called shear stress. And the more you exercise, the faster your blood goes inside of that vessel. So if you look inside it, can you see my cursor? Let me see if there's a way that, I think there's a way that you can see my cursor. Here we go, mouse. Now you can see my cursor, can't you? Okay, so think about the inside of this vessel right here. Picture that there's blood shooting through the vessel, and we start to exercise, and we start to breathe heavier, and our blood starts to, our heart starts to pump harder, and our blood starts to move faster. Well, all of the blood that goes through this vessel here puts stress on the outside of that artery. And that stress going through the artery causes the release of nitrous oxide. So I don't know if you're into racing, right? But if you're into car racing, then you know that nitrous oxide is a boost, right? It's a huge boost of, let's just call it adrenaline, of speed, right? With which you can move your car because it makes your fuel efficiency much higher. Well, this nitrous oxide is actually inside of those vessels as we get our pressure going and we have more shear stress on those arteries. And do you know what that nitrous oxide does? It increases the size of the vessel. So let's go back to that garden hose. Remember when we took the garden hose and we kinked it? We kinked the garden hose and the water stopped going through. Well, let's let it go. We let it go, the diameter increased, and the water shot right out like a bullet from a gun, right? Right, like an engine when you press the nitrous oxide button and the car just goes bam, right through. You've probably seen it in a movie. The same thing happens with your arteries. When the nitrous oxide releases, the artery increases in size, and then we more efficiently move our blood to get more oxygen. Well, how this has an effect on injury prevention and aging is the more that happens, the more compliant the vessels become. And the more compliant, what that means by compliant is the vessels are more capable of adapting, right? They're more capable of accepting that influx of more blood. So what that's going to do over time is it's going to cause less decrease in this circumference. It's going to cause less plaque buildup, and then we're going to become more efficient in our cardiovascular system and have better heart health overall. That's going to have a lower heart rate for us. And it also is going to keep decreased blood pressure as we get old. Overall, increasing our heart health and decreasing the likelihood of a cardiac event as we age. I know that was a lot, so does anybody have any questions? It's also kind of interesting, usually, I find when I talk about that. So people always ask about the nitrous oxide and about how compliance works. So don't feel bad if you don't have a question, but if you do, now would be the time to ask. Is this working for you, Jeff?
Yes, and that was actually very interesting. That is not something I've heard or knew. I have not
Oh, wow.
hearing or the nitrous oxide before.
Yeah.
I always just thought that was like for, dentists. So
no, it's not for dentists. It's for you. You have it in your vessels. It's in your vessel wall. Okay, so I guess I have to stop annotating here so I can move my. There we go. Okay, so with that said, heart function, you can, okay, so this is important to know. So 38% of men, this is approximate, to 45% of women over the age of 65 have high blood pressure, and approximately 65 to 70% of fatal and non-fatal cardiac events happen to individuals with hypertension. So this hypertension is an injury, really it is. Hypertension is a serious problem. And in our society now, not just our country, but on our planet, in our world, we have a huge problem with hypertension and high blood pressure. A lot of it is diet related. And then another part of it is that people are neglecting to exercise on a regular basis. Think about, I know this is really a stretch and taking it back, but like Neanderthal times or hunters and gatherers, I would bet that now they have other things that they had to worry about too, like, being eaten by like the wild bull or something, but they were hunters and gatherers. And I bet you if we had to look at their cardiovascular systems, they would be quite efficient because they're constantly exercising. They're constantly moving our bodies, but we are creatures of comfort. Right? So we have adapted our lives over time or evolved over time to be nothing but comfortable. And because we've caused ourselves to be nothing but comfortable, we've stopped moving as much. And because we've stopped moving as much, we're not having that compliance and that efficiency to the cardiovascular system. So the other thing is muscular strength. As we get older, if you look, I know we've got that famous thing that I keep talking about with age. Look at here. I think you can see my cursor again. If we see our grip strength this is among Americans, I believe, but grip strength among Americans over a course of time significantly starts to, or slightly starts to decrease around 35 years old. You see that? And then when we get to around 55 or 60, significantly decreases. A lot of that significant decrease has to do with things that I was talking about, such as menopause and, you know, many other factors of aging. Our life habits are super, super important.
So it's much harder to strangle your significant other the older you get.
Much harder. Yes, exactly. So our maximal muscle strength is between 20 to 30 years of age. And then we have a dramatic loss once we get to about 70 of about 3% per year. This is a person who does not exercise. Okay. This is a normal sedentary person who has not exercised. 3% loss is significant, especially when you think about the fact that they're already behind the goal because they haven't been exercising. This is where a lot of those injuries and a lot of the healthcare system gets overwhelmed because they weren't preemptively planning for this particular process of aging. So they have lower body strength. They have more problems standing and walking. They've decreased balance, which makes them a fall risk, and overall decreased independence. So the reason I decided to talk about this today when it comes to prevention is because I think a lot of younger people think of injury prevention as being like, well, I don't want to get injured when I play sports, or I don't want to get injured when I'm, I don't want to get injured. I think a lot of people think about sports really, or I don't want to get injured when I'm working out at the gym or something like that. But really, it's like we need to start thinking about this in the long term, because if you start thinking about your health, wellness, and exercise, and even the psychology of how exercise carries you and follows you, it really is about longevity. You want to make this a life change in somebody's life or a life experience instead of a temporary thing. You know, you're not trying out that yoga class or trying out that strength training class for a couple of months so you can get in shape and go to spring break, which we all have coming up, right? Did you do it already, or is it coming? I don't know.
Is that even a thing anymore? I don't even think it's a thing anymore. We're not allowed to have spring break anywhere, right?
Oh, stop. We still have spring. They take away spring break. No, they still have spring break. Anyway, so it's not getting in shape to go out for spring break or, you know, look good in the summer when you're going out to the bar or going dancing with your friends. It's about the rest of your life preventing these things from taking over and taking away your quality of life. So I say here, why is muscle strength so important? So it's important for things over time to improve your quality of life and maintain activities of daily living, like eating your food or driving your car or brushing your teeth, or even being able to complete your job, or when you get older, keeping up with your children, your nieces, your nephews, your friends, or even your grandchildren as you age even more. Maintaining balance, less fall risk, big time injury prevention. So this is just a slide that shows you muscle mass decrease as we age. So you don't have to like remember all of this, but you might find it a little bit interesting. If you look at a young person here, so this is their muscle mass against fat tissue here. And if you look at how their muscle mass is encompassing such a wide area, and this right here is like a muscle cell, and that muscle cell is nice and fat and juicy and healthy. And if you look over here at an aging person, you can see that their muscle cell, like these cells here in the young person, are nice and fat and healthy, and they get smaller and there's less of them over time. So that's what happens is you start to lose fibers, but also you start to like lose the filling that makes them so tight and so supportive, I guess you could say. My business is called Tonicity Fit. And what tonicity is muscle tonus. So that's the healthy muscle that is supporting your joints because they're nice and full and taut and strong. And this is just another example here as to how the muscle composition changes. You want it to be a bunch of little muscle fibers and spindles here instead of losing the casing, because this equals tonus and support. This equals laxity and fall risk. So I always like to show that because it's kind of an eye opener when it comes to how things change as we age with our muscle composition. So you'll talk about things like atrophy. We talked about that a little bit as you go on. So it's decrease in muscle size. Sarcopenia is natural decrease in muscle size as we age, and atrophy is what happens anything beyond that. So those environmental and habitual factors as we age. It even occurs in master athletes, which we've studied. And I already told you what sarcopenia and atrophy is. And that's where things like strength training are really important to prevent. Things like muscle power. Power is balance. So when you hear that people are fall risk and they don't have balance, it's because they've lost power. Power is not just your ability to throw some bars around in CrossFit. Power is your ability to stand on one foot or your ability to propel yourself forward or backward when you're walking. So after 35 years old, again, you have a 6 to 8% decrease in power per decade. And on top of that, it decreases even more without exercise. So like I said before, that's a concern because we lose our ability to walk, balance, so on and so forth. And why does this happen? Because power and mass are directly related. So remember in the last slide, I showed you that the fibers change. That means that it's less mass. So less mass, so there's a direct correlation in the physics of power and mass. Less mass means less power. Less muscle mass means less ability to balance yourself when you're doing something as simple as walking or something as complex as running across the room or even running a marathon. Make sense? So we already talked about power and physical function and fall risk. Falling is not normal as we age. It's very important for you to understand that. It is not a normal part of aging. If you are a fall risk, it's because you've had significant decrease in your power and strength abilities beyond what is normal with the process of aging. So there's a lot of things that can be done for fall prevention: resistance training, flexibility training, and aerobic training, as we've already talked about. I think like for the rest of these, it's not as important to talk about because it's a bunch of like little specific stuff. But the last thing that I really want to mention is bone health, because bone health is something that Jeff has probably heard me talk about a lot as well. A lot of these falls, we're at risk for fall as we get older because we have less power and less muscle tonus and less mass. But the reason that fall risk is so very important is because without exercise, we have less bone density. And that decrease in bone density, which you'll hear later is like osteoporosis or osteopenia over time, we have more risk at breaking bones and more risk of them not healing efficiently. So resistance or strength training is important because it puts stress on those bones, and the stress on those bones enhances the speed with which our bones repair themselves and with which they stay strong. So over time, all of that decreases without strength and resistance training. And if you're interested on like the cellular level of that, you can Google it, and it's actually really, really interesting to learn about. So I hope that I helped you understand a little bit more about why, about injury prevention and what happens as we age, and why it's important not just to think about the now, but important to think about injury prevention for later on in our lives. And I decided to pivot a little bit and talk about that a little bit more this year because I'm finding that younger populations really aren't understanding that and keeping it into perspective. And I think it will help you be better clinicians later on in your lives. When you're finished with school and you go working in a public health profession, whatever it is, with all of your clientele. So do you have any questions for me as of right now?
So I've got an overarching one, and I'm going to ask kind of for everyone here.
Sure.
So if we're talking about essentially preventative exercise that's going to help you avoid issues in the future, at this point, what are the ways to do that? Do people need trainers? Is it just aerobic? Is it anaerobic? Is it weight training? Is it yoga? Is it a combination?
It's a combination. Yeah. So I think I saw that you are probably going to talk about the components of fitness. So like muscular strength, muscular endurance, body composition, cardiovascular fitness, and flexibility. Are you going to talk about those at some point, Jeff? Okay. All of those, it's all of the above are very important. And your muscular strength is important for things that we talked about with power and strength and function. So that would be something like resistance training. Your muscular endurance, which would be different techniques and muscular training, would be important for heart health, but also for things like power, balance, function, your ability to carry out your daily activities. So muscular endurance is your ability to go against a force for a period of time, right? So that would be a lot of the longer duration things that you would do, like brushing your teeth, eating your food, repetitive motions, right? Or even like hockey, like you play, Jeff, right? Making it across the ice, the rink, back and forth for long periods of time. Body composition. So I'll just use one quick example. When you are obese, you form a lot of small capillaries that go into the fat tissue of your cells. And those capillaries become very thin-walled capillaries, and they have a thin diameter. So they will over time increase pressure because they need blood to go through the capillaries to supply blood supply to that extra tissue that has grown on your body. But because they're so thin, remember that hose, the pressure has to increase to efficiently get the blood to all those places. So that's why body composition is important. Cardiovascular health, we talked a lot about that because I'm very passionate about it. That's going to be the compliance of the cardiovascular system, the ability to expand and contract against the force as needed as your body calls for it. Flexibility, that's going to have a lot to do with joint health and joint mobility, which overall is going to affect your ability to develop muscle power and muscle strength over time. Is that helpful? Yep. So what's important is, so there's something called the FIT method. It's FITT, frequency, intensity, time, and type. And I use American College of Sports Medicine FIT principle. So that's the ACSM FIT principle for all of the above that we just talked about when I prescribe exercise prescription to each of my clients. And I do it on an as needed basis, depending on their habits, depending on their job, right? I always ask clients, what do you do for a living? It's not because I want to know how much money they make. It's because I want to know what they're doing with their regular lives. I use the example of an accountant. The accountant is always sitting down, hunching over. Chances are they're going to need a little bit more frequency, intensity, time, and type in the area of strengthening their back and lengthening their chest. So it really depends on the client as well. So hopefully that helps to answer that. There is sort of a template that you follow, and then you adjust it to an as needed basis, depending on the client or the patient that you have. So I hope that was enjoyable and interesting for all of you. I know it's a lot of information, and if any of you are interested in my slides, I'd be happy to send them to you. You can ask Jeff, and then he can connect you with me, and I'll send them your way.
Wonderful. Thank
Awesome.
you so much, Sarah. Appreciate
No
it.
problem.
Hang
You
out
got
for a
it.
quick second. Somebody here wants to say hi after we go off. But thank you guys. If you have any other questions,
Okay.
shoot them through me and I'll send them over to Sarah. I see her fairly regularly.
Yes.
More
Well, I
regularly.
hope you all have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
You.